All right, and that takes us to our last album review of the show. Friend of the podcast, Lou Reed. Well, not actual friend, because we'd have to be ghost hunters for that one. But I feel like he's a friend of the podcast because of us covering him in his various incarnations. And, last time we talked about Lou Reed, we talked about Transformer. We've also covered all 4 of the Velvet Underground albums in the original run. So we've, gone down quite a bit of Lou Reed. So this will give us another chance. This is the second Lou Reed album that we're going to cover. Before we get into it, I think Josh will start us off. Matt, do you mind running numbers for us?
Yep. So this is another one that almost made our traditional show, number 113 in the 1970s.
Why don't you tell the listeners what album we're covering? I just realized we did not do that.
Berlin. This is Berlin by Lou Reed. It was the album, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was the album that came right after Transformer. Number 113 in the 1970s, number 14 in 1973. Number 490 of all time, all this on Best Ever Albums. This album is not on Rolling Stone's top 500 list. So, John, this was another one you selected. You just wanted to get some more Lou Reed in here for us?
I think so. And also, it was at the time that I was going through, it was 101 on the list on Best Ever Albums when we initially were doing the list.
Fluctuations.
So it's so close, so I figured it would be in there. And also, this album has a really interesting backstory, which I'll talk a little bit about when I get to my part. But I know that infamously Rolling Stone declared this album a disaster, is how they described it, was their take. So, and I'll kind of get into why, but I'll hold off on that till my segment. But yeah, so it's an interesting backstory. That was part of the reason I picked it.
Well, this is a challenging album to listen to one time through.
There are some themes on this album, Josh, I would say.
Yeah, you want interesting themes and not sameness. You could go with this album on this.
No, this album is not samey.
Yeah. So, just as I thought, after the strong debut and hearing Transform, and this goes in a different direction. Now, did Bowie produce this album? Because it sounds like a Bowie produced album.
He did not produce this album.
Okay.
From what I'm seeing, yeah.
Okay.
Producer was Bob Ezrin.
Okay.
Wikipedia.
Who's very famous, by the way. You know Bob Ezrin, right?
Yep.
I mean, he's produced I always think of him as the guy who produced $1 Billion Babies by Alice Cooper, but he also produced all of the major Kiss albums in the 70s.
Aerosmith, Kiss, Pink Floyd, Deep Purple, Peter Gabriel.
Yeah, I'm not even looking him up. I just know that I think of him as the Alice Cooper and the Kiss guy is who I think of with him.
And Fish. That's an eclectic
really?
group of, yep. Mm-hmm.
Fish. Wow. Peter Gabriel, did you say, too?
Peter Gabriel, yep.
Yeah, I know he's a very famous record producer, but yeah.
So this is not like Velvet Underground albums. This is not like Transformer. This is so it's trying to fit Lou Reed's songwriting and kind of voice into this bigger sounding album. There's a lot of orchestration on this album. It is very bombastic. Well, can I give you an idea of, just because it goes into the theme, Josh? I don't mean to cut you up, but he did $1 Billion Babies by Alice Cooper. He did Destroyer by Kiss. He did both The Division Bell and The Wall by the Pink Floyd, Matt, in this one. So he's got, those are very produced albums. You know what I mean? You know what each of those sounds like when you listen to them. So that's a little bit of an idea of some of his work. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very big sounding album. Imagine cymbals crashing and while Lou Reed is singing, and that's kind of what I got from this album. You've got flutes, you've got drums, there's horns, there's big piano. It's all in here, and it's coupled with Lou Reed's most depressing lyrics ever at times, and most depressing songs ever.
And that's saying something, because Lou Reed has not been one to stay away from life's darker sides.
Yeah, you can't. This is not an album where you can dismiss the lyrics and just pay attention to the music, because he's writing about a wife who commits suicide and writing about children that are left.
Well, as I was listening to this, I said,
this is going to be the ultimate test of if Matt means it when he says he doesn't listen to lyrics at all. Because to me, it was impossible to listen to this without hearing the lyrics. But I don't want to jump up, so I don't know what it is. There's a part of me that thinks he's going to say, well, I didn't really pay attention to this, which is going to make me crack up. But continue, Josh.
Yeah, and then there's crying kid sounds inserted in one song at the crying kids, and then so he writes The Bed, which is the second to last song and probably is the most depressing, and then he follows it up with a song called Sad Song, and that must be intentional because it's almost like laughable how it I don't know if it could be sadder than The Bed. And I guess that's kind of the main theme of the album is the contrast between this big sounding album and big orchestral sounds with the sad lyrics and themes of the album. You still have the strength of Lou Reed's songwriting, and his voice is the same. It's kind of got that. I mean, Lou Reed's voice is very distinguishable and recognizable, and that comes through on this album as well. But I guess that's a good place to start. Where did you guys kind of fall on this? I didn't love it as much as Transformer. I'm not sure I loved it at all, but I did find it interesting.
Well, I'm going to punt to Matt first because, like I said, I'm going to weave a little bio of this album in, and I feel that'll fit better after we hear Matt's initial take. So, Matt, if you don't mind, I'm going to punt to you here, and then I'll jump in.
I think I did love this album, and I think that this is an album that I was thinking, kind of comparing this to the Todd Rundgren album, because I think both of these albums require repeated listenings for me. But this one I would be much more excited, and I would be looking forward to listening to this much more than Todd Rundgren. There was a lot of stuff on here that I liked, but it's so complex, particularly the first half, right? The first half, and that's what I did notice. I'm like, okay, the first half is a lot of that stuff that you're talking about, the orchestration, the instrumentation. Some of it's kind of like a show tune type thing, and then he goes into, and then he rocks out with it, and it just, a lot of those first four, what was it, like 5 or 6 songs they're the most interesting musically of the songs on this record. And then the second half is kind of, that's where it gets more acoustic, more stripped down, and I liked all of those songs too. That's when I started noticing the lyrics, John. So not in the first half. The first half I was just blown away by like all the stuff that was happening sonically. And so I was just going, there's a lot of cool stuff going on here, and there's no way I'm going to digest it at all in one listen. But there were plenty of things that had me, interested in that. He's not even really singing on this album. I mean, Lou kind of just, he talks, and he kind of throws a little, he might raise his voice a little bit more here or lower it a little bit there, but he's not a singer. This is kind of like borderline Serge Gainsbourg's type stuff, in terms of just the way that it's kind of like monotone kind of singing through it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I like his voice fine, and I think that it suits what he's doing here quite well. But there's just, that first half just musically is blows me away, and then the second half is bleak. And so the lyrics, when I pay attention to lyrics or when I hear stuff, so like there's definitely stuff in here that I was going, okay, what's going on here? Particularly with like Caroline Says Too. I think that's the one I started going, there's some things I'm hearing here that aren't so great. And then so rather than, like, I've missed like a couple verses, and then what I'll do is I'll look up the lyrics, and so that's what I did for like the last 3 songs. So I was like, okay, this is, and the freaking, that Bed song, man, that my note was like, Jesus, shit's getting bleak here. This is just very, very, it's very, and I like the music. It's like, to me, that's like great music to like listen to at night, like the sonic presentation of it. It's a very kind of chill type song, but then you listen to lyrics and you're like, what the? And then the kids song with the kids screaming in the background, being ripped away from their, that was freaking, that was disturbing.
Yeah.
And so, and I was just like, I liked the song. I didn't like the end, because I was just like kind of creeped out by the kids wailing in the background, being stripped away from their mothers. So there's some definite spooky things going on towards the end of this record. But oddly enough, it ends on a really, Sad Song does not sound like a sad song. At least it's sonically. It's
Right.
actually really kind of an upbeat
I am
song.
1,000% confident that that was done
intentional.
intentionally. Yes.
There you go. So yes. So so it's just, and I like the way that it ends because it repeats that refrain, the sad song over and over again, and the music's great to that. So he brings you down, but then he brings you back up musically. So I was not expecting this. Well, I don't know what the hell I was expecting. I guess anything was up for grabs here, but I really did like it, and I think I'm almost confident that the more I listen to this, the more I am going to like it because it's got enough of those Easter eggs planted throughout pretty much every song that makes me go, ooh, that's cool. As opposed to Todd Rundgren, which was like, maybe I like this. I don't think I like it, but I think I need to listen to it again. This was a much more confident, feeling about how I would like it. But it does require repeated listens.
Yeah, I would say I would agree. I think there is something there, but I don't know what it is yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, okay, so a little bit of background on this album, so you know. So this this album it's like this once again, much like Leonard Skinner, like Lou Reed is kind of and the Velvet Underground is a fascinating slice of life in the 70s to some degree because the Velvet Underground always lightly sold, right, to say the least. They were not a high-selling band in their time. And then Lou Reed's early solo albums did not sell well either. So then he releases Transformer, with the gleam of David Bowie on it that sells very well. At which point, which surprises everybody, right, including Lou Reed. And so then the record company basically rewards him with more artistic freedom. And, Lou Reed being Lou Reed says, okay, with this artistic freedom, what I'm going to do is a loose concept album on a doomed couple, right? In this case, Jim and Caroline, right, who is referenced often. So the kids that you're talking about, as you might imagine, is Caroline's kids being taken from her. And along the way, if you didn't catch, we've got domestic violence amongst the couple, suicide, manic depression, prostitution, drug use, all of which either involve, in many cases, Caroline herself. You know what I mean? I think to some degree it's about a couple, but Lou Reed often takes, I think, like he almost becomes the personification of Caroline, who's just this person who's going through this god-awful life cycle, right, of anything you could possibly imagine that can go wrong. And this has often been called the world's most depressing album. And while I don't know if I'd go that far, I think it's more of, I think I always recognized this album, as I was listening to it, that it was sort of a song cycle. And so when I recognize something as a song cycle, it's at least somewhat removed from the artist themselves. And to me, the most depressing albums are ones where I can listen to it and go, God, is that the actual artist, what he's thinking? Whereas in this one, it's how much of it's Lou Reed and how much of it is his observational take on songwriting, which, I mean, we saw a lot in Transformers.
Yeah,
so
I don't think I would take a whole lot of this from, thinking that this is like Lou Reed. I think that, Lou Reed's more observational. Yeah, I didn't get that feel. You're right, John. That's a good point. But I don't think this is about him at all. So. But
this is a incredibly ambitious album. I think, like a lot of ambitious albums, some of it works really well, some of it doesn't. I think one of the funniest things about this is that a lot of people really hated this album at its time. It's gotten one of these retrospective. People really like this album now. But Lou Reed, who is notorious for hating all of his albums, right, and not being in it, this is the one he'll always defend. And I almost think it's the contrarian in him, right? Because people for a long time would say to him that, this is your chitty album, right? And he'd be like, no, I actually like this one. This is one of my favorite ones and stuff. So, which is, exactly what you'd expect Lou Reed to do. But the session band had Steve Winwood and Jack Bruce, by the way, in this. So they're floating around the studio doing some work right here. Yep. But, I am starting to learn that, and I even wonder if I'll go back to White Light and White Heat and like it more than I did. That was the only one that I really didn't like that they did. I'm starting to really appreciate the variety of what Lou Reed's work does. He always kind of keeps me on my toes a little bit, and I think that's my takeaway from this album. I think that throughout I was when a one listen album, one of the best things you can say about it is if you're engaged the entire time, especially if it starts to run into like the 48-minute mark where it's a long album, right? But I never was disengaged from this, and I felt like a voyeur, like looking at this, but being more and more interested in terms of where it's going. And without even knowing, the exact nature of the song cycle, as I've said many times, I am a lyrics guy, so I'm listening and I'm piecing it together. And like Matt, sometimes I'll make sure I understood a song, but with the lyrics itself by looking them up. But in this one, I really didn't have to, because the way he sings makes it very easy to hear exactly what he's saying. I wouldn't necessarily say he's over, enunciating, but it's not blurred. You can know exactly what he's saying. Yeah.
Well, and I go back to read the lyrics, not because I can't understand what he's saying, but it's just because again, my ears are going to the music, and so I'll catch like a word here or there, and I'll be like, okay, and then I'm like, maybe I want to look this up, and I'll go look it up because I didn't really pay attention to what was happening in the first half. So rather than rewind it and listen, I pull it up. So that's more why I do that.
But even in this bleak soundscape, there's still like those elements of what you saw in the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, some like odd breakthroughs of catchy pop sensibility, which always kind of cracks me up. And that's like the thing that has really stood out for me about the Velvets and Lou Reed stuff. It's like they're never in the pop lane fully committed, but they're never out of the pop lane as well. They reside in this world where like they have one foot in traditional pop, almost like nostalgic pop, and then they have this other foot in this like avant-garde, let's make it as hard as possible to listen to sound. And it's always like kinetic energy of like stuff bumping up against each other, right? Like electrons, right? Like one hand, let's make this as hard to listen to as possible, and the other, let's root it in something that we're a pop. And that's what they said about the Velvet Underground. They wanted to make like art rock, but they wanted it to be modern. They wanted that to be the pop music, which is hilarious when you think like, how can you make art rock and it be pop music at the same time? But
to me, that's the sweet spot, right? Like, because if you can hold on to the melody and pop nature of a song, but also kind of take it in a different direction, make it avant-garde, make it a little unique or different or edgy or whatever. To me, that's the best. So yeah, this is and the other cool thing with this is like a song would stop and like totally do something different. You think it actually is a new song starting, and he's kind of just doing something a little different. So it's a little frantic in that regard. Like it just is like boom, then a new idea goes here. But it's all super interesting.
Can we talk about how good a song lyrically Men of Good Fortune is? That's such a good song lyrically.
Yeah.
It's stuck in my head, not just the sound of it, but also just it's a very profound song. It doesn't say anything that people don't know, but it doesn't mean that what it's saying isn't profound. It kind of had that element of like that John Prine like songwriting, it's very direct, and then he throws himself into it, but himself as the character. But that's, I think, where like Lou Reed was wearing the hat of himself, but also the character in the couple, but also and like he's empowering both, right? So really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and this is his second highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, so it does get. I mean, yeah, and we almost covered it. So I like Lou Reed. I really like Lou Reed.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Syracuse education's coming through in this album too. Like I think he's definitely trying to like put, like the song cycle. He's trying to tell a story in this album, for sure.
What's the difference between a song cycle and a concept album or a rock opera? Like, is there what's the difference?
I think a rock opera tries to tell a like cohesive story, whereas a song cycle is just songs about a theme.
But this
you get like around a theme, like Nebraska by Bruce Springsteen, I think is like a song cycle.
Well, I think this is a concept album then, maybe.
Well, it is because it does feature these two. I mean, it's described as a rock opera even sometimes, which I think is a little bit ambitious. But it clearly is about this couple, and I mean, it's clearly also about pretty much the degradation and fall, of Caroline. And I think what Lou Reed is also really good at is he writes about people on the fringe, but especially women on the fringe, but in a very sensitive way. You know what I mean? Like he doesn't. That's hard to do for a male songwriter, and also hard to do in the early 70s, right? But you feel that he has compassion for these women who are, you know, addicts or have to go to prostitution or shunned by society, or you know what I'm saying? Like that's a theme that I feel like comes up quite a bit in his music. And like I remember reading a review as we were doing this, and they used a word, and God, I really wish I could remember because I'd never heard it before, but they talked about the kind of characters that Lou Reed writes about, and it was like the perfect word, and I will find it and I'll clean that stack on our thing. But yeah, he likes to write about like the underside of life, but he doesn't write about it in like a voyeuristic way. He writes about it almost as a member of that group, but also he can write about it as a member of it, but also detached, which is a real, I mean, that's what a great songwriter is, right? He can, you know, he can write from it as someone who intimately understands it and someone who intuitively understands it.
And it's funny you bring up Nebraska, because actually I thought that there was a little bit of Nebraska, like on O Jim, like the second part of that. He gets out an acoustic, it's like this big song, and with all this stuff going on, and then it's just him and a guitar, and it sounded like kind of like a Nebraska song that, you know, in the tone or the way that it was sounding could have come off of that album. So very varied, and there were times, again, you know, kind of comparing it to Rundgren, I felt like sometimes with the Rundgren album, he was throwing a bunch of stuff in the pot and mixing it all together, and it just seemed like it didn't fit. It seemed like it was too much. This is throwing a lot of stuff into the pot, and I'm like, this is working. You know, like he's able to make all this stuff kind of match up in a strange way. So yeah, this is repeated listenings, and I almost guarantee it's going to get better.
So if you want to know, by the way, the definition of a song cycle, according to a couple different resources, is a set of related songs, often on a romantic theme, intended to form a single musical entity. So when listened together, they're supposed to evoke a basic, like a theme that's not like a plot, more of like, you know, love or harmony, or, you know, to some degree, What's Going On was a song cycle. Right? That's a perfect example. That's a song cycle about like urban America and the black experience in urban America. Right? There you go. Right. There's the song cycle. Right? Okay. So, so perfect. All right, guys.
I think Bookends might have been a song.
Bookends
cycle.
Was the song cycle on aging, right? Was it aging? I think. Yes, getting older.
Well, and life really, because it starts off with like you're not it's not all about aging. It's about, you know, the different developmental stages of life as well.
Yeah, good recall there, Matt, because that definitely was a song cycle too. But I'm sure there's other examples, and who knows, maybe we'll clean that stack too. And
I'd also say, if you're going to say that a rock opera has a story, I don't know about that. Some rock operas, I'm like, I can't tell. I don't know what the hell is going on in that story.
I think that most rock operas are often, you know, the joke is always that as writers, musicians make good musicians. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that's always been kind of the theme. That's like the concept album can often fall into that too. You know, it's I always think of like, we're going to cover this band quite a bit, but I always think of like the difference between Rush as a musical act and then Rush, you know, cribbing Atlas Shrugged, you know, in their lyrics, and it's like, boy, that's like the perfect example of like the difference between lyrics and the sound of the albums, you know. But anyway, we'll have plenty of time to talk about that. But all right, well, an interesting set